choices, the very direct weakening and mocking of government posts by proposing to fill them with figures who are already publicly on the record opposing the very departments they seek to run and the very work of those departments. So you put someone anti-science who has been completely fact-checked by every major medical authority to allegedly oversee those same medical authorities. You put a partisan warrior in charge of a department where the main qualification is a nonpartisan administration of the law. Kennedy's baseless claims have included things like falsely saying Wi-Fi causes cancer. It does not. That it causes, quote, leaky brain, which is not a medical term. That school shootings are all caused by antidepressants, which is flatly false and can be, of course, discredited by any international comparison of the various issues. That chemicals in the water make children automatically transgender. No medical science supports the water link theory there, if you want to call it a theory. And he has said, again, not a doctor, not a scientist, but he is out here getting ready to try to take over control of some of these agencies that are related. He has claimed, quote, AIDS may not be caused by HIV. The falsehoods continue.
There's 25% of Americans who believe that they know somebody who was killed by a COVID vaccine.
Killed?
Killed. 25% of Americans.
You would seek to ban fluoride in the U.S. water supply?
I think fluoride is on its way out. I knew in May of 2020 that the vaccines were not going to protect against transmission because I was actually reading the monkey studies. They asked me why I wasn't wearing a mask. They said, wasn't I scared of dying of COVID? And I said to them, there's a lot worse things than dying. And they said to me, like what? And I said, like living like a slave.
This affects you. This affects your safety. If you have family, older, younger, parents, children, this affects their safety. If you are the more informed person in your community, then you will be someone who can do something positive, citizen to citizen, person to person, parent to parent, dealing with what will come out of this. And again, I want to be clear and I want to repeat it. This is not an ideological thing. We've covered the debates over lockdowns on this program. There were reasons that different government policies ran into different opposition over time, and you debate that out respectfully. There are valid differences of opinion on those policy matters. But what you just heard there and what I just showed you about many false statements about science and medicine, armed with government power, is dangerous. This is not just about whether you look at something online and find it false or laugh it off. We are talking about the administrative federal powers over medicine, hospitals, nurses, science. The Centers for Disease Control chief has already warned prior to today's news that RFK's misinformation from a place of power is dangerous to the public. The concern about RFK potentially getting through the Senate confirmation process, once unthinkable, by the way, is roiling the FDA, current and former health officials, and others trying to make sense of this. When RFK Jr. ran for president, more of this was on display. And as I've mentioned to you, on this program, we try to give you the news and the facts and bring people on to discuss it. So it's not about censoring or disappearing things. And so we took time out to have a taped interview with RFK Jr. and discuss many issues with him. One of the things that came across then, when he claimed to be an independent candidate, but also was cozying up to Trump, was the mix of outright combativeness that he has for really the way a lot of these things work in the government, the way medical science and doctors and other people who sometimes risk their lives in hospitals take care of people, the kind of vitriol he had for them, and an intense confidence about everything that he wanted to do, and later he said Trump would let him do.
I've litigated against almost every one of the major federal agencies. I've sued CDC, NIH, EPA, FDA, USDA. I'm going to issue an executive order that any government official that lies to the American public in conjunction with his federal duties will be dismissed. And I'm going to issue an executive order stopping the intelligence agencies from propagandizing the American public.
That's who Trump is proposing to be in charge of these things. And in the Orwellian nature of people lying and then accusing others of lies, notice how he's proposing to control things. RFK Jr., in his statement there, his own words, would be the person in charge of what is true and a lie. And then the people who didn't agree with his truth about science or his suppositions about how HIV and AIDS work or leaky brain, then he says he would use government power to fire, to oust, to purge all those people. This is not a drill. These selections this week by President-elect Trump are quickly undercutting the pre-election claims that we heard from Republicans and certain conservative GOP apologists who were arguing that a Trump second term would be a way to advance competent conservative policy. False. Or it would be a way to move on from Trump's more extreme vows in campaign season once the campaign was over. False, based on the personnel decisions we are getting tonight. It is precisely the opposite. Just as Trump promised, these picks for these important posts, we are talking about the Pentagon and the Justice Department and the hospital oversight around the entire country. Just as he promised, these picks attack the foundation of competent, independent government. These are picks that are quite obviously and deliberately, and for him, unsurprisingly, sending out the shockwaves because these are people who are inexperienced, partisan, and again, as respectfully as I can say it, quite fringe and outlandish. The repercussions are in the real world, from hospitals to battlefields around the world, to how prosecutors will approach the citizenry when the Trump administration lawfully accepts these powers January 20th. Take the Attorney General nominee, Matt Gaetz. His vows to abuse power in order to attack Trump and perhaps his own enemies, that can cause as much pain on Wall Street as on K Street in D.C. And so let me show you something right now. The same conservatives who publicly and loudly rooted Donald Trump on over at the Wall Street Journal's conservative opinion section, now on this matter, they already have second thoughts, coming out against Gaetz, opposing him for Attorney General, saying he's a nominee only for those who want law used for political revenge, and it won't end well. These Wall Street conservatives are correct that Gaetz has vowed such revenge. That's not in dispute. We still live in a factual world, and that is the fact. But knowing that Gaetz has vowed such revenge doesn't separate the Wall Street Journal or these other Trump supporters from the fact that their candidate Trump also has vowed such revenge quite clearly and repeatedly. This is the feature, not a glitch. Now, there are Republicans who clearly view Gaetz as a particularly bad, politically vulnerable version of carrying out that plan, but it is the plan. Going into a vetting of Gaetz or trying to even stop him from becoming this official, running DOJ, if Republicans find the votes to do that, that could send a message about some kind of line. But the rule of law will require more than simply stopping a personnel decision like Matt Gaetz. It will have to stop President-elect Trump's unlawful demands. And anyone who knows anything about history and autocracy, and Rachel and Nicole, my colleagues, were discussing this just in the last few hours, knows that you can start that battle when you meet it, or you can wait around and when you're forced into it, face it in an even weaker condition. Trump's own allies say that he passed on AG candidates who were acting like they were applying for some kind of, quote, judicial appointment, said clearly with derision. Quote, they talked about their vaunted legal theories and constitutional bull. One insider told The Bulwark. Matt Gaetz was the only one who said, yeah, I'll go over there and start cutting effing heads. Former Congressman Gaetz's public record includes demands to hijack the government and abuse DOJ powers for what has always been, and unless the Supreme Court makes another change in the law, what is still today, the abuse of government authority for unlawful retribution vendettas.
Republicans are in the majority and I have subpoena power, I will personally investigate BLM like I'm a Soros-funded prosecutor going after the Trump organization.
We're proud of the work that we did on January 6th to make legitimate arguments about election integrity.
I've made it a living hell for the swamp rats, and many of them are retiring now.
We are going to go after this administrative state, and we're going to start at the Department of Justice and the FBI.
We either get this government back on our side or we defund and get rid of, abolish the FBI, CDC, ATF, DOJ, every last one of them.
Abolish the DOJ, says the person that Donald Trump is proposing to now run the DOJ. And remember, before you even get into these potentially Washington conversations about former prosecutors or abuse of power and going after your opponents, all of which must be dealt with seriously, you also would be abolishing the Justice Department that does all financial crime, national security, violence against women, 93 U.S. attorneys around the country that enforce federal laws to keep people safe. The competent agenda of dealing with crime in America by either party cannot continue with someone who advocates abolishing the entire DOJ. And if you're saying, well, he couldn't have meant that, if someone's saying that, listen to yourself. You sound like the Wall Street people who said that about Trump, and I showed you 3 minutes ago. He meant it. He means it. Matt Gaetz has confessed this agenda in advance, and Trump likes that. Other MAGA travelers are afraid, apparently, that at least admitting all this so directly is a bad strategy, at least on the tactical or optical level. Figures who have tried to give Donald Trump everything he's asked for in politics, like Ted Cruz, that's been his mission since he lost to Trump in their first primary. Even Cruz publicly pushing back on a, quote, surprising pick.
As for that particular nomination, look, we have a process under the Constitution where the Senate provides advice and consent, and I trust that process. That nominee, like every other, will have a vigorous vetting, will have confirmation hearings, and every nominee is going to be judged on the merits. I will say that was a pick that was, I think, very surprising to the entirety of the Senate, and so we'll assess the nominee on the merits.
Ted Cruz says it was surprising to the entirety of the Senate. That means whether you believe him or not, for whatever reason, today he thinks it's in his political interest to say the whole Senate, 100 senators in both parties find that surprising. Surprising is a code word for bad. But again, Ted Cruz has followed and supported everything Donald Trump has said he's wanted to do, including politicizing the Justice Department or abusing its powers. So we are witnessing through these shock waves a little bit of a sussing out of what's going on. The people who supported and said they supported Donald Trump's agenda are concerned that he's appointed someone who actually publicly admits he will fully go forward with that agenda. There are sources telling NBC that both Gaetz and J.D. Vance are calling around to try to get Senate Republican support. It is hard to imagine back in Donald Trump's first term that Republicans would even give a hearing to fringe nominees like Gaetz or RFK. Now they're debating over whether they can get to 51 votes. And today's Republicans are also, many of them, not saying what I just showed you from Cruz. Some are admitting they want to be complete rubber stamps or even help Donald Trump twist the rules to ram all his nominees into power without their own Senate having any say. Now imagine spending your career trying to become a senator